All right, cool. Are you guys ready? I'm not ready, just so you guys know. So there will be no slides in this presentation whatsoever.
Just you beating with the code.
Well, yeah. We're just going to look at a bunch of code. I'm going to show off a little thing that I've made. We're going to talk about Stencil and web components, Gutenberg, and all sorts of fancy jazz. Anybody have experience making Gutenberg blocks in here? You've made one? Mm-hmm. You're the only person? Has anybody ever made a Stencil web component?
I had to fix a couple that were broken because they wouldn't work in Gutenberg, and I made a brand new fresh one, and what was the other one? Something else I had to bring forward, but I guess that wasn't Gutenberg after all. So just
okay, cool. Well, before we kick this thing off, I'll just kind of talk about myself a bit, and so that in case don't know who I am by now, I'm the lead organizer of this whole thing, and we needed more developers to talk, so I figured I would talk. Also, I've tried to do this talk twice now. Both times it didn't turn out very good, so we're going to hope for today being the third time the charm thing. Yeah, hopefully that's a thing. So, if it's not, I'll probably do this talk again at WP Omaha. But anyway, this is a very complicated topic that we're going to get into. Oh wait, hold on. More about me first. I'm Rob Ruiz. I code a lot. I do WordPress stuff, Angular, JavaScript, the whole nine. I'm very front-endy. Used to be a designer. Now I'm a developer. Any questions about that? Cool. All right. You want to know more about me later? Let me know. So, web components are a thing. They're not the same as like React components or Angular components. All these JavaScript frameworks use the term component, right? When we're talking about web components, we're not talking about those types of components. We're talking about ES6 standard compliant components. They are referred to on the interwebs as custom elements. So here, I'll pull up, since we were already Googling some stuff here anyway. Can I use custom element? Okay, cool. So, there's a support for custom elements, and you might be thinking, that's not that great.
A lot of reds on there.
Yeah, you're right. It's not that great. But, luckily, there is a thing out there that allows us to create web components that are more backwards compatible than that. Because in JavaScript, we have this thing called polyfills. And polyfills fix stuff when it comes to backwards compliance nonsense. So, Stencil will generate polyfills for us that make it so that we can see our custom element in Internet Explorer, right? And when we're putting custom elements or web components into WordPress, we have to consider older browsers. That's one of the big things about WordPress, is it works everywhere. And so it would probably make sense for us to build something that works in older browsers as well. So, again, this is just like my decision making when it came to what am I going to use to make the custom element, because you don't even have to use Stencil Js to make web components. But it just makes your life easier. So why not use Stencil Js, right? It doesn't make sense not to, in my opinion. So that's what we're using, Stencil Js. I'm not going to do, like, it would take me a long time for everybody to go from zero about web components, Gutenberg blocks, and how to build those things. We'd be here for like 3 hours or something, right? So you guys are going to have to take it upon your own to like go learn more specifically about certain details that I'm not going to cover when it comes to A, building Gutenberg blocks, and B, how Stencil JS works and what it does and everything. So I'm going to try not to go into too much detail there. However, if people have questions, feel free to ask them at the end, and I'll get into as much detail as we have time for. Okay? So, what are we building? Okay, good question. I wanted to build an audio player that allows me to just pass in the URL for the MP3 file, and then just allow me to control it and play it in a way that's a lot cooler than a regular audio player, right? Where it's just like a line with like a little dot there and you can like scrub back and forth. That's kind of boring. I would like to be able to like see the waveforms of the audio. I was working on another project that used the same library that allows you to do this, which is called WaveSurfer.js, and I wanted to build a web component. It just seemed cool. I know it's not that crazy. It's like, yeah, okay, I mean, you can play this thing, and great. There's some music and fancy schmancy. Who cares, right? It doesn't always look this way, by the way. I'll show you how it actually looks soon. So, just go with me here. Imagine that this will be useful and somebody will want this, okay? Anyway, we're not going to get into WaveSurfer.js either, by the way. Just know that WaveSurfer.js is a library that when you pass it an MP3 file, it renders the waveforms for it using the Web Audio API, if anybody's familiar with that. So let's not get caught up on that either. We just want to be able to do this and we know we can. So let's go look at how it looks in Gutenberg. Boom. So this is the end result. A Gutenberg block that behaves the same exact way on the back end as it does in the front end. Okay? Why? Does anybody know why it's important for us to be able to generate the thing the same way in both places?
Why it's important, or like from a user experience standpoint?
Yeah, I thought it was a design paradigm for improving the end user who's doing the website design. They are seeing it as they're doing it, drag and drop.
Correct, yeah. Gutenberg, when you build Gutenberg blocks, right, most of what you're building is just how it shows up here, right? It doesn't. When it goes to do stuff on the front end of the website, you have to write other code to make it, if you have any level of interactivity, or if you're doing HTTP requests or whatever, like that logic is going to have to be applied in other means on the front end, right? So you would have to write the same thing twice if you are building something that has any kind of complicated functionality like that. You would have to write it in Gutenberg and do it the Gutenberg way, make the block look good like that, and then we would have to go write like something else so that when it comes, like it reads through the stuff in the content, it knows to generate whatever, right? We could do it with PHP. There's like, what is it called? Dynamic Gutenberg blocks, where we can just like call a PHP script and it'll just use PHP to render the area. Anyway, we would have to build it two different ways. Doing it with Stencil as a web component means that we can develop it, write the whole block outside of Gutenberg, and then once it works there, it obviously will work anywhere on the internet, right? So even without WordPress. And so that means that as long as the script that powers this web component is loaded on the page, you get web component. Cool. It just works, right? So that means all we got to do is have the HTML and the one JavaScript file included in both places, and now we get to see the same exact thing on the front end as the back end, and it solves that problem, right? And it also makes it stupid easy to add it into Gutenberg. So let's go look at some code. All right, so again, I'm not going to go too deep into Stencil Js. I think it was Brock talked a little bit about it yesterday. Anybody see Brock's talk? Raise your show of hands. How many people saw Brock's talk?
Which one was that?
3. The one about
GraphQL.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what, half the room maybe? Cool. All right. So hopefully you remember some of his talk. Stencil JS is like some kind of weird, love child between Angular and React. I suppose is the easiest way to think about it, because we're using TypeScript, and so there's decorators, and we render everything with JSX. Okay, so.
Blow that a little bit.
Oh yeah, sorry, presentation mode. Sorry, thank you very much for writing that. It's a lot easier for me to look it up on here. What if we didn't enter full screen? I'm scared of.
You almost don't need the left sidebar for us.
Yeah, I know. I'm just gonna do the presentation mode. I'm so scared though. I don't have very good experiences with this thing. I always have a hard time getting out of it. Okay, so that should make life a lot easier, right?
Yeah,
You guys good?
yeah, much more readable.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to quickly touch on what's going on in the JSX. And then what we're going to do is talk about the props and how we manage the props and create the props and the attributes, because that's where most of the magic is happening. That allows you to connect the dots between Gutenberg and the web component. You'll probably have questions after that, and then we'll look at what the Gutenberg block code looks like. So here's our JSX. This is just what... So first of all, if you don't know how to build Gutenberg blocks, show of hands again. How many people have never written a Gutenberg block? It's like most of the room, right? Okay, so we're going to quickly... Let's back up a second here. I didn't realize it'd be so many. All right, cool. So let's start with the block, and then we'll go to the stencil. Okay. So in Gutenberg, we pass two areas that allow us to control how this thing looks. Okay. In the end, so we're going to skip all this right here. Let's not talk about that quite yet. We just care how it looks. So the top part that's called edit, we pass an edit attribute, right? That is what allows us to control what this block looks like in the editor, right? Under that is another one called save. You can think of save as front end. So if you want to think of it as like front end of WordPress, back end WordPress, save is your front end, edit is your back end, okay? The reason save is the front end, and the reason it's called save, is because all it does is tell Gutenberg what content to save to the database in the v_content column of the post, right? And for those of you that don't know, a lot of the magic that's happening with Gutenberg lies in HTML comments. So all it does is use HTML comments to like dynamically put like attributes and stuff around the actual HTML that gets generated, and that way, that's how they kept it backwards compliant and not break everybody's website. Is they have to use kind of a hack. It's kind of hacky to like add your functionality using HTML comments, in my opinion. But whatever works, right? Bottom line is they need to find a way to keep shoving everything into that one database column, right? The content, and they knew it had to be just HTML because that's the way they've always been doing it. So it says, hey, when you go to save it into the content, I want that in the HTML that gets saved in the content. Okay? So when we create a custom element, all we're really doing is creating a custom element. An HTML element, right? It's one that never existed before. So we get to call it whatever we want. I'm just calling it WS Audio Player for Wavesurfer. It's using the Wavesurfer library, so it's the Wavesurfer Audio Player. Okay? And then what's happening here is we're like passing in data via the HTML attributes. Okay? So we get to make up our own attributes. I had to figure out what I wanted to configure about the thing going in. And so these are the attributes that we use. The audio one is obviously mandatory because you need to have the audio in there. So that's the URL for the MP3 file. And then we can change the title, color, height. Those are attributes that are like kind of more optional or whatever. Because technically we don't have to have the title. We can just throw some audio there. Okay? And I'll show you how I made those in Stencil later. But the important thing that I want to highlight right away is how beautiful it makes the JSX. And since none of you have written a Gutenberg block, has anybody at least seen the code for a Gutenberg block? Yeah. Normally, this JSX here, if you're using JSX, you don't have to, but most people do, for blocks, is extremely small compared to what you would normally have there. Even up here, this looks like a lot. Most of what you see here is just the inspector controls, and I'll show you what that is here in a minute. Everything after this comma is what actually gets generated in Gutenberg when you put the block there. And again, since it's a custom element, literally one line of code.
Yeah, they're normally massively more complex than that.
Yes.
The one I did was a Google Map thing that I was putting in a lot of the JavaScript that interacted with it, a whole ton of stuff.
It can get crazy. You could spend in this file right here weeks building your Gutenberg block, all just so you can make it look like that and behave like that in Gutenberg. That doesn't even guarantee what's going to happen when you put it on the page.
That's in the PHP file that pulls it in.
Yeah, so then you got to go rebuild you make it do whatever in PHP or whatever. You got to basically build it twice. This makes it so we build it once and then we slap it in here super simply, and basically what gets generated on the front end when it comes to actual code is exactly the same as what gets put into the editor. Now obviously I'm using InQ scripts to tell WordPress on this page, or when you use this block, InQ this JavaScript file essentially is what I'm doing. And the JavaScript file is what makes the block happen. But we're obviously doing the same thing on the front end too. So we use, I'm going to have to get out of this view. Exit presentation mode. Okay, I've got it. I think there's a shortcut for that, but I don't remember what it is. What's going on here? Okay, so those that inspector controls part, all that does is it allows us to basically design our own. Sorry, get that out of there. Our own block editor area on the right hand side. Okay, so obviously since this block doesn't know anything about WordPress, doesn't realize it's going to get put into Gutenberg, and so that part of it we do still have to write all that out in the block file for Gutenberg. Okay, so that's why. Hold on, where's my other? That's why we have all of this code here. So, again, imagine if we had that level of complexity down below. This file would be massive. Cool. All right. So those attributes, those fields. Are basically allowing us to control what is being passed into the HTML attributes. And what's beautiful is that since all of this is just JavaScript and React and fanciness, right? It wasn't hard for me to make it to where when I change this, it actually changes real time in the block. Right? So that's cool. Right? It's almost like they were made for each other or something. How crazy is that? It just works. We changed, I don't know, I can't remember if I don't think I set this up to be watchable. No, I did not. But I did make it so that when I put a different file in here, it re-renders the audio. Yeah. So that's cool too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions so far? About the Gutenberg side of it? I'm going to go talk about the stencil side, and then I'm going to dive a little bit deeper. But I just want you guys to wrap your head around everything that's going on here. The whole idea what we're trying to do is just define the beauty and the elegance of the way these two things work together, not so much get into the technical details. So let's go finally look at the stencil.
So just as a high level, so are you suggesting or that it's better to make these web components versus additional Gutenberg custom blocks, I'm guessing?
Kind of.
So because of the things you mentioned, like it's better, front end, back end's the same. It just works, versus I don't know. I'm just trying to think through, like, if I'm building like a theme or a website for a client, and I'm just thinking through like their user experience and the time it would take to build, and so I'm just thinking, like, based on what you're saying, it sounds like it would be better just to create this using Stencil Js and JavaScript so that you can see and do things right on the back end, and then magic is on the front end too, and it looks the same, it feels the same. What would be the downside of that? Nothing?
There is no downside.
Okay.
You're kind of right. I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that when your Gutenberg block reaches a certain level or threshold of complexity, this approach is much more intelligent than the standard way of making a Gutenberg block, which is just writing everything in the Gutenberg block files, right?
Yeah.
And doing your JSX and all that stuff in there, right? And what's also cool is that a lot of people use JSX for Gutenberg blocks, right? Well, in Stencil, we're also using JSX. So the learning curve, if you already learn how to make Gutenberg blocks, is very minimal. All you really have to learn is a little bit about how TypeScript works and what decorators are, and kind of like figure the ins and outs of Stencil. And that's it. Like, actually building your HTML is really easy. For simpler blocks, it would probably still be faster to just make it the traditional block way. But it would have to be really simple.
Yeah.
And at some degree, you have to wonder, what's the value of having this Gutenberg block in the first place if it's that simple, right? So I'm not saying that, like, this method should replace all Gutenberg block development. I'm just saying, pick your battles,
Okay.
right? That's what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So you'll see here that all the HTML for the actual block, so what gets rendered on the page when did it do the wrong one again? It did. Right? Yes. This one. Okay. So what we put on the page is WS Audio Player. This code represents what that gets turned into by the browser using our JavaScript. So our actual design happens here in Stencil, and we just write all of our HTML in here, and then all of our CSS. Well, what's beautiful about this is that now we can leverage Sass, because we have a build process that's happening, right? That a lot of people will use like Babel or whatever when they're building Gutenberg blocks to do like the conversion of their JSX to something else that Gutenberg understands. So there is sometimes like a build process associated when you're doing Gutenberg blocks, but you don't really have to. It's just really ugly to write your content without JSX when you're doing Gutenberg development. So if you don't already have like a build process happening, then this becomes an advantage. But if you already have a build process that's running when you're doing your block development, you can still do Sass there. You might as well. But what's nice is that Stencil Js, by default, when you make your components, like, it already knows about Sass. It's already designed to work with Sass, and so it just does it right out of the box. And I don't know how many CSS people are in here, but that's nice for me personally, because why wouldn't you want to write in Sass? So that's nice. And also, Stencil Js automatically does your real-time reloading of the page for you. So if we make changes in here, and the reason this looks all wonky is because I did an npm start already, and if I just put like some stuff in there, and I go back to that page, our stuff is already there. It's just hard to see because the font color. Anyway, so that means that we can quickly iterate over what we're doing and what we're building, even, in my opinion, even faster than when you're doing traditional Gutenberg block development. Now there are, like, if you set up like the right boilerplate Gutenberg block thing or whatever, and you can put Webpack in there and have it like do this for you if you set it all up that way. But that's not what I would not consider that standard Gutenberg block workflow. That's more of like fancy, like, hey, I'm going to create my own workflow and make it even cooler and easier to make my Gutenberg blocks the regular way. So again, like, it's not impossible to do this type of thing when you're doing the old school traditional way of, I call it old school. It will be old school eventually, I promise. Yeah, the regular way of doing Gutenberg block development doesn't just do that right out of the box, where Stencil Js does. So again, another advantage of using Stencil Js to make your Gutenberg blocks is that we can rapidly iterate over this thing. I know it looks crazy because it's like, I don't know why, but for some reason when it does like the auto refresh of the page, it just keeps adding the stupid waveforms there. So yeah, that's why it's not a huge deal. A little annoying. Not annoying enough for me to figure out how to fix it. So yeah, now if I wanted to do something like put like a time block at the end there that shows like how long this audio file is, it's like really easy to do that. So easy, in fact, I can just do it right here while I ask any questions that any of you have before I dive deeper into Stencil itself, because that can be complicated as well. Any questions? No questions? Okay. We'll call it duration. I'm just going to make up some numbers here. I don't want to spend too much time, but I just want to show you guys like the iteration process. So we'll pretend it's like a minute and 33 seconds or something. Save. If I had two screens, this would be cooler. There's our 1 minute and 33 seconds. Now we can go into our SAS file, make some changes there. We'll just keep auto building as we go. What's going on? Where's SAS going? It stinks. Why doesn't this one have SAS files in it? Well, trust me, it does have SAS compilation. I think I just didn't create a SAS file. Anyway. We'll just tell it. Whoops, that's not right. We'll just do that. Go back to our file. So it's like all off the page because this div doesn't have position relative on it, which is a little annoying. So I can go do that. Anyway, I'm not going to sit here and do CSS all day. You get the idea. It did do it. The CSS is there. So you can sit here and go back and forth, or if you have two screens, obviously, keep changing things and saving it and then looking over and see this thing change like real time until it's done. Then you go through the build process. I'll show you guys how I've got the attributes created in here, and also how you're able to do the real-time part of it. So here's where we create our props. So this is just allowing me, not in, you guys got to keep reminding me to enter presentation mode. Every time I change this, it's really helpful. So, okay. So, there's our audio attribute, color attribute, title attribute, we call them props. This is a state that just shows whether or not it's playing. And then we use this watch decorator to define like which attributes we're watching or which props we're watching. And then that expects a function to occur. So it says, hey, anytime that thing changes, do this, right? So we just use the WaveSurfer JS library here. Basically the whole thing is right on this WS player. And then we just call load and the new value, whatever is passed into the attribute. And here's our height prop, which probably should be up with the rest of the props. Sorry, I code sloppy sometimes. And then we've got a bunch of methods here. All this does is allow me to instantiate the WaveSurfer library, which is what this is right here. We're just saying, hey, give me WaveSurfer, and then this thing goes down, and we use this method built into their API called create, and we pass it all the attributes, and then we load, tell it what to load. It pulls in the audio MP3 link that is passed into the audio attribute, and we can always check the state of is playing for a number of reasons. And then this is all of our play pause functionality built into the button. So what to do when the button's clicked. Yes, I still have console logs in there. Sorry. It's just on GitHub. I haven't like sold this thing or anything. Yeah, and so that's basically it. And then in here, we have to do some JSX funkiness to tell it like how to control the button and what should be updated visually. And then the way WaveSurfer works is you just tell it what the ID of your. We're almost doing like it's almost like a custom element inside of a custom element type thing, because what WaveSurfer does, without being a web component, with just JavaScript, is it looks for this div with the ID that we define, and then says, okay, I'm just going to render essentially a canvas, I think is what it uses, inside of this div with your waveforms all drawn out after the web audio API like gives it all of the values that it needs to draw the stuff on the canvas, essentially.
So it's actually playing it as it generates those, or it just as it...
No, well, that's a good question. So I guess I would think of it more as like it analyzing it, like so it reads the audio file. I don't think it actually plays it in the background or anything like that. I think it just goes through and reads it because it's just a digital file. I think that's how that works. I don't know how wave files work though. Well, it's still digital. I the same thing, probably. Cool. So that's the whole presentation. No, I'm just kidding. You probably want to see in Gutenberg how I had my stuff set up. I'll note, does anybody know who Zach Gordon is? Yeah, so Zach Gordon is the man. I learned a lot of like my workflow and how I make Gutenberg blocks from him. So if you want to know more about like how to get into building Gutenberg blocks with like a really decent workflow, you can just go find his GitHub page, and he's got some good stuff on there that explains, well, that allows you to clone his like block setup. Let's see. So exactly where it is. You can find it later. The Gutenberg course. This guy.
I know him.
He actually did a whole workshop at WordCamp last year. I got to hang out with him. Cool guy. Yeah, so you can basically clone this down, and it already is set up to have Babel in there for you, so you can use JSX and Sass. It's all set up to do your Sass compilation, and so yeah, I will start many of my Gutenberg blocks from this repo, just because it makes it extremely convenient to get off and running with all that stuff already hooked up. And so I definitely started here when I made the Gutenberg block, which is why I have Sass files in there. And so that's what this is doing, and it follows the same exact pattern that he uses. We've got an index.js file in the blocks folder that tells it about all the different blocks. So if I was to add a new block into this plugin, I would have to duplicate this line and have it import the appropriate file for that block. And then all of the block, like logic, is all in its own directory. So there's our Sass file, which isn't very big. It's not very big because we did all of our CSS in the web component. And then we have our index.js. Where did I just click on? Okay. The index.js is where like the majority of our logic lives for the Gutenberg block. And then I think this icons, yeah, this is just so you can give it your own custom icon in Gutenberg. So now we can just go up here and look for our icon, and then click this, and we can put as many of these on the page as we want, anywhere we want. So, I don't know, purpose of this, maybe a blog that talks about music or something along those lines that wants to be able to like write a bit about the music and then put the song there. I mean, it's kind of like a miniaturized version of the SoundCloud player. I'm sure many of you guys, anybody here use SoundCloud at all? Yeah, same type of thing. We'll go to my page. So they're kind of doing a similar type of thing here. And they like take this approach of like chopping up, I don't know, like chopping up them into little blocks. I don't really like that as much. I kind of like the way WaveSurfer does it right out of the box. Are they using WaveSurfer to do that? Probably. I don't know why you wouldn't, unless they create their own thing that does it. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was going for, something like that. You can just embed in blog articles or whatever at will and just tell it, here's the MP3 file, and also, hey, by the way, I can upload it into the media manager, WordPress, which is handy. And so now your WordPress, actually, if you think about it, you could even like take this, I wonder if you could create like a share mechanism for it kind of easily, and then have your WordPress site host all the MP3 files. Maybe. I just thought of that, sorry. Didn't mean to get distracted. So, yeah, that type of a thing. So we can just drop these in at will, change the color. Unfortunately, the color's not being watched, but if I change this to blue and then update and refresh the page, it should be blue, I think. Yeah. Cool. Any questions? I know it probably would have been a lot better if I had slides and stuff, but I had a whole WordCamp to organize. And yeah, I don't know. It's just something I whipped up. I've been doing this talk like shorter lengths, longer lengths. I don't even know how long I want it to be anymore. Yeah?
When did you build this block? You edited the content for the block in the options area versus in the block itself? Was that a restriction of Vue.js, where you just make it more quickly, versus editing the title of the block? The other side versus the options side?
Good question. I could have done it that way. I basically just wanted to make my life easier, and I didn't want to spend too much time building the Gutenberg part of it, because I didn't really care as much about that part. And it would have been, yeah, it just would have been a lot more complicated, because then I would have had to, like, in Gutenberg, overwrite parts of the UI that are already designed to do something very specific, like autonomously from WordPress. You know what I mean? Because you're thinking like, okay, well, you could have a button in the middle that says like upload or whatever, like basically put all these controls and like overlay them over the actual block itself. That's what you're saying, right?
Most of the text, the MP3 color selection, like editing the text part versus the settings for color.
Like if you just click on the title, it would
Yeah,
Yeah. Again, keep in mind that we're designing this thing to work with or without Gutenberg, with or without WordPress, right? And so those are like very Gutenberg specific functionality, and it kind of goes against the whole concept of creating it this way in the first place, because the main advantage isn't just the workflow. It's not just the fact that they merge together so beautifully. It's also the fact that you can create components that can exist anywhere, whether it's WordPress or not. So that's a huge advantage, right? You want to be able to just deploy these anywhere. So you don't want to like clog across the strings a bit.
Because if you said you're using the same files on both ends, then technically you'd have to find a way to not let the front end user choose the name.
Correct. That's exactly
Right, you'd have to have a mode for front end versus back end or something.
Yeah, and then you're
Correct.
getting into the two splits.
You could put an attribute on
It's a little
the.
combining. You want to separate the concerns, I think, a bit, and yeah.
You could make the component so that it had a mode that you could put inline on it, and it will be in one of the properties that say admin or not. And
That's
then
correct.
It would always load in here as admin, and when you load it in here,
We could.
however you want it.
We could, yeah. You're absolutely right.
So
There's nothing preventing us from
it wouldn't be hugely different.
No, I don't think the cost, I don't think, outweighed the benefits.
Yeah, there'd be cost because you'd be putting a lot of GUI for editing the thing within the thing.
Yeah, I just, maybe call me lazy, I don't know, but that's why I chose not to explore that option. I did think about that, though.
In my map when I did, there was actually context. Well, the map already has a lot of components for doing changes on itself. You know, what zoom are you at, or what your center location, etc. is, and having that be controlled by the component, which wasn't actually a component, it was a Google Maps thing with a little bit of HTML and JavaScript wrapped around it. But
Yeah, so I like thinking about things like this. I like thinking about things as modules and components and keeping the UI. You know, there's other things that come with the benefits, or other benefits that come with, the Stencil Js workflow. Stencil Js also has unit testing built into it, so that's nice. It's extremely strict because we're using TypeScript, and so you got some Rails to stay on there. What else is happening there? Oh, we talked about the Polyfills. Let me show you what it builds. That's probably an interesting thing to know and see. Okay.
presentation mode.
So if we look at the dist folder, this is what it gives us. So we get a singular JavaScript file, and then we also get a whole folder with a whole bunch of other files in it. And don't quote me on this. I think this is what's going on under the hood, but I'm not entirely certain. I think what's happening is that if you're on a browser that understands ES6 and is up to the latest modern standards, then that main JavaScript file, all it does is tell you what chunks you need to call in, because it does some chunking here, and that's it. And the shadow dump CSS. But it's also like doing all your polyfills too, so it will intelligently only use the files in the folder associated with polyfills if you're on an older browser, I think is what's happening there. But yeah, this thing will now work in Internet Explorer. I tested all the way back to 9 or 8, I think. Yeah, so using Stencil, you can get super backwards compatible
That's crazy.
custom elements that are very easy to put into WordPress. Any questions about that? Go ahead.
So, since you're essentially merging Gutenberg with web components, do you see this as a way to take, so whether you're migrating to WordPress or you have other systems that are not WordPress, do you see this as a way to take pre-built, like web components that you already have to make them WordPress compatible right away? Like,
Absolutely. But that is a fundamental concept of web components in general.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, so say something's built in a different, like, whether or not it's even built in JS or just different languages and stuff. Like, you think it would be, because you have to build it to work with, I think, Gutenberg editor and everything to convert it, but it would be a good transitional piece for other websites that you don't have to lose crap you already built, you know?
Yes, one of the beautiful things about Stencil is that you don't, it's framework agnostic, but it's not anti-framework.
Okay.
So you can put it into, like, say, a React app or an Angular app or whatever, and it'll work the same as if it wasn't in a framework at all. So you actually have a couple of options there. Some people will like build web components that React components are designed to like consume essentially, or you could actually do it the other way around. You can put a React app inside of a custom element as well. And, yeah, people actually use Stencil to build PWAs too. So that's kind of what you're doing there.
So it sounds like
gallery.
it sounds like that you built this way mostly for your own personal life experimentation. You want to try to keep exactly those things, kind of those paradigms. If somebody were to really embrace Gutenberg, though, from a user experience standpoint, you might forego some of the things that you were looking for in terms of like same on the front, same on the back, to keep it consistent with all the other Gutenberg blocks and stuff like that, where they would be able to edit it in different places, and you would know whether you're in the admin area versus on the front end, and it would be a different experience. But that would be more from a user experience standpoint with somebody who's less technical and more on the user side, would have a similar experience with other Gutenberg blocks. Because yours is the same but a little different in terms of like all the controls are over here, whereas a lot of the Gutenberg stuff is going to be like real-time editable. And the point of that kind of user experience is I can just be in this window and I can change things on the fly here. I don't have to go hunt down all the settings and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
It's really just what you're building for and how the user experience you want to shape is where yours was more about, I would like to keep it exactly the same here, being on the front end, so I'm going to or offload some of that stuff out of there so I can keep the same markup and same controls and whatnot.
Yeah, that would be mostly accurate. Yeah. I mean, could you build a Gutenberg block that was more like interactive or whatever, like most Gutenberg blocks are in Stencil Js? Yeah, absolutely. I think you could. But again, you would be like kind of defeating part of the purpose of using that and creating it as a web component in general, which is, again, the fact that you can use it anywhere. That makes it kind of not as reusable, I think, if you're doing it just for Gutenberg. So, does it make sense to use it if you're building just for Gutenberg and you wanted all that interactivity built in? I don't know. Maybe. If you like your code to be cleaner, I think at that point it becomes a preference. Because you're losing a lot of...
Who are you building it for is really the primary.
Exactly.
Are you building it for yourself where you know where things at, you don't have use case yourself, or are you building it for like the marketing team who needs everything really consistent? They want that kind of a deal, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sure, I wouldn't argue that there is no reason at all ever to do it the way we're doing it today, but I will say that clearly there's an avenue that has not been popularized yet that has a lot of benefits, right? So, yeah, that's kind of all I'm trying to say. I'm not really trying to say like one way sucks and the other way is great or whatever. I'm just saying there's a lot of benefits to doing this, and I think this approach is extremely misunderstood, or maybe not understood enough. Yeah. Any other questions? Sorry, I feel like I kind of flew through that pretty quick. Last time I did this talk, I didn't do it in 20 minutes, but the first time I did it in 2 hours. So.
You're out of time, we're at 9 till.
Okay.
Well, if you have enough people that haven't done the
Awesome.
Gutenberg thing in there, you can spend more time on that, so you can dynamically alter your how you.
Yeah, and I think this talk would be better for an audience that understands more about how to build Gutenberg blocks or whatever, from the code level. So yeah, if you don't know Gutenberg block development quite yet, and you don't really do any kind of like JavaScript framework coding or understand build processes and stuff like that, then this may seem like a bunch of, I don't really get it. But trust that from doing that stuff, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Cool. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for listening to my talk. I'll be around for the rest of the day, obviously. I think I am going to go into the help desk area, though, and help people out. So if you want to find me and ask me questions, you're welcome to come in there and hunt me down.